Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about using our 2D assets as part of in-world UI here on our 3D Unity scenes. And so I'm taking a look at this rock. This rock is going to be a significant object here in my scene, and so I want to create a little bit of UI that will help draw some attention away from these two ducks. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a UI that just kind of hovers above the top, and then we're going to apply a script to it which will cause it to constantly face the player's camera. And this technique is known as billboarding. So let's start out with the setting up the UI first. I'm going to work outside of my game object here initially when I'm setting up my Unity canvas, and then make it a child of my rock. The reason I'm doing this is that I'm going to talk a little bit about how we can set the scaling to really specific values. And when we do this, if we do this inside of something that might have been scaled, like for example my rock, I'm pretty sure that it has some scaling applied to it already. That can be a bit misleading, right? So if I want to make sure that this texture occupies 1 unit of in-world space, and I've got something that's already has 1.97 units, excuse me, 1.97 scaling applied to it, it's going to end up with a result that's not quite accurate. And so what I'll do here is I'm going to create a UI element, and for this example I'm going to create an image. I'm going to bring in one of these 2D textures and set it as an image that I'm using as my UI. And when I do this, you can see I get this a result that is not at all what I want. It's by default using my screen space as a way of dictating the dimensions of this canvas, and then it's using just a default texture here just as a stand-in for me. And again, relative to the size of things that I'm looking at, not at all what I'm interested in having actually happen. Now, we want to have some control over the placement of our canvas, our UI element, so we want to make this not being dictated by the screen space, but rather appear in-world by using our world space render mode. And when we do this, you can see now we have control of our rect transforms again, which is fantastic. So I can go and do things like, just reset this here. I know that also that my texture that I'm planning on using, which is going to be my check circle here, is set up to, it's brought in at 256 by 256. So I'm going to go ahead and set up my canvas as well to just have those limits of its dimensions. And I need to go ahead and do the same kind of thing here as well with my image, right? So by default, I'm going to set this to 256 instead of the 100, and I'm also going to zero this out. So that I get something that's right in the center of my canvas that's filling all of it appropriately. Now, I'm going to go back to my canvas here and just point out one other thing. Our event camera here that it's giving me a warning about very kindly is really just if I'm planning on using UI elements and interacting with them in some sort of way. However, I hate to see warnings just kind of left dangling, so I am going to drag this here. It keeps things kind of nice and tidy. I'm going to leave everything else the same here, right? I don't really need to mess around with these things here. My reference pixels per unit or my dynamic pixels per unit, because the way that these things are set up, I'm going to handle all of these kinds of things here and just be sensitive to the dimensions that I brought in this texture as. So I'm going to go back here now, and here we go, my canvas, right? So I have this set up. It's still not the right size though, right? It's huge. And so we need to start out by, or continue by setting our canvas to an appropriate size. Now, I mentioned the reason I'm working outside of my rock is because it's scaled, and I want to make sure that if I want this to be a certain size, that it's, relative to this. And so how do I go about actually setting that scale in a way that's not just kind of like a bit of guesswork, but is a little more deliberate? And the way I can do that is by just doing a little bit of very simple math, and actually Unity will do this simple math for me. I start out by the dimensions in units, in terms of the width, set to the maximum amount of space that I want this to occupy. And so what I want it to occupy is just 1 unit of space. So I'm going to leave this as 1. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide this number by the width in pixels that I want my canvas to occupy. And so in my case, I know that I've set it up to 256. And so I take that number and I divide it, and I end up with this. And I'm just going to do the same thing here now and take this number and do this along all of it. And see, what I end up with here is something that occupies 1 unit of space. Here in my scene. And let's see, I'll turn on my map here, so that my grid, so that you can see that it is actually mapped in a way. A little challenging, but we can kind of see here if I take a look at it in this mode that I am only using 1 unit by 1 unit. So it works out really great. So if I wanted to change this then, and I wanted to make it so that it occupied at maximum here, only half a unit, I could take half a unit here, and then again divide it by the amount of space in pixels that I wanted it to use. And so once again, I take these numbers and I can go and just copy it, paste it here, and I get a really nice result that I'm in control of. I can be really deliberate about the way that I'm using it. And so now I'm going to just go ahead and zero this back out here, and I'm going to leave the position where it is. And I think what I'll do is, now is a good time for me to go ahead and take this canvas and make it a child of my rock. This thing is pretty small, so maybe this is probably also a good time to go ahead and just take this and follow my initial instincts of making this occupy 1 unit of space on the screen. Here we go. Great. Looks good. And let me zero this out here. Right. And I could position this exactly where I want to. So if it looks a little bit weird where it is, I could just scoot it over and get, just really tweak the result so it matches my needs. Now, to actually use this texture here, I don't need to go about setting up a material, but as I mentioned in our last video, I do need to take this texture type and change it from default to sprite, 2D, and UI. And so here I'm going to hit apply. You can see that it's set my clamp mode for me. It's letting me know that I'm just going to use a single sprite. And it's also taking advantage of the black and white, the alpha information that I have in here to set the alpha in my my UI element. And so I'm going to take this now that I've set it up, and I'm going to go back to my image, and I'm just going to locate that source image here. Here it is. Great. Right. And so now we have this UI. And once again, so just like when we were working with this as part of a material, we can now do things like apply a color to it, because we've thought very deliberately about how we intend to use it in our space by making this a white material, a white texture. Unlike our textures that are used as materials, the UI is rendered on both sides, so it's a nice UI element, even if we're creating UI that is not facing the camera, right? That it's diegetic and we can maybe walk past it. This is a really great option for us. Now, what if we wanted to take this and make it so that no matter where our camera was, the UI would always be facing toward the camera? So for example, I'm just going to orient my camera here so that way I'm looking at this thing, but I'm at an angle. Maybe I'll make it a slightly sharper angle so that the results is just a little clearer. There we go. What we can do is use a technique known as billboarding. And this is a really simple technique in which we rotate the object to face the same way that the camera is rotating. It's really great for UI, but it could be applied kind of, if we were creating a kind of a 2D and 3D game, like old-fashioned Doom or something, classic Doom, where we are, always wanting our the things in our scene to be facing toward us. We could use this technique as well. Now, I've taken a very basic script here from a Unity 3D wiki that's called Camera Facing Billboard. It's by Neil Carter. It's a really simple script. I modified it just slightly to, instead of look for the camera, to just look for the transform. If we were going to do anything more complex here, we could, we could set up the camera and be able to access more of its features. But here, I'm really only interested in the rotation, so I'm just kind of getting a little bit of a head start into the coding here. And we're going to take the transform and we're going to force it to look in this direction that our camera is facing. We're going to do this in late update so that we can reduce the possibility of jittering happening as we're updating this stuff. This will apply to other kinds of camera systems like Cinemachine that you're using. And again, though, be sensitive to like how you're calling your camera's update to make sure that there aren't any conflicts introducing some jitter. And so I'm going to go back here now, and what I want to do with this script is I want to just apply it to anything that I want to have rotate to face. And so here I'm going to apply it to this canvas. And so I can take this script, my Billboard script, and just drag it onto my canvas. I'll make sure to set my camera transform here. And so when I hit play, you can see now that it's at attention. And so I can rotate this around, right? And you can see that the camera, so this, what I'm dragging around here isn't the camera, but it's just my view in the scene view, is still rotating this to face me directly. And so here now, if I go and take the camera and just rotate it around, you can see that I'm still facing forward here. And when I go back to my scene and I take a look at my canvas, right, it's just rotated to face that camera, regardless of how I position it. So let me go ahead and move my camera here a little bit more. Okay, and now I'm going to rotate it. So the rotation is really critical. There we go. And once again, this is nice and oriented to my camera, but it's not, not paying attention to what I do with just my scene view. So that's how we can use 2D textures as a way of creating really nice UI elements. We can use them as in-world elements to be able to face our camera as we need. But then also, if we're choosing to kind of have them as things that we can kind of walk past and, they will guide us and then sort of go away as we move past them, we could also choose to not billboard these as well.